All right, so we are continuing to factor, and as I'm looking at these problems, our a values are not 1, so this is factoring when a is not 1. Okay. So the first thing that we should always check is if there's a greatest common factor. So between 4, 5, and -6, we want to decide if we can factor the same thing out of everything, which we can't. So then that tells us that we are either going to be using the grouping method to factor, or you can use guess and check. So I am going to start with the grouping method. So we would take 4 times -6, so that would be -24x squared. And then we need factors of -24x squared that are going to add to be the middle term. So if I'm looking at this, I would choose, let's see. So we know 1 and 24 works, 2 and 12, and then we would have 3 and 8, 4 and 6. So I just have to choose which set. Now remember, these all have x's with them, even though I didn't write that to start with. And the sign on one of them has to be negative, since we're trying to multiply to get a negative number. So the set that's going to work, since we're going to be subtracting, is going to be the 3 and 8, and our 3 has to be negative, so that way when we add these we get +5. So now I'm going to replace 5x with my new factors. So we would have 4x squared minus 3x plus 8x minus 6. And then after we replace, we are going to group the first set of numbers and then the second set of numbers together, and then do the greatest common factor to continue. So out of the first two terms, we can factor out an x, and that would leave us with 4x minus 3. The second set, we can factor out a +2, so I'm going to put +2. So we always need to make sure that we're writing the sign here, even if it's positive. Okay. And then we would have 4x minus 3. And then we have to continue to factor. So now I'm going to factor out my parentheses, because that's my group. So I would take out 4x minus 3 from each term. And again, it's going to be these numbers in front that are left. So it'd be x plus 2. And that would be our final answer in factored form. All right, so again, if you prefer the guess and check method, if I start over, so I'm going to put a little squiggly here. So again, we're trying to factor 4x squared plus 5x minus 6. So I would start out by listing the factors and trying to figure out what your signs are going to have to be. So in our parentheses, we're trying to multiply to get a negative number and then add to get a positive. So I know I'm going to have a plus and a minus here. And then I would list the factors of the first term and then the factors of the second term. So for the first term, so if we have 4x squared, we have to use 1x and 4x, or 2x and 2x. And then for our last term, so let me use a different color, we would have to use, since it's -6, we would have to use 1 and 6, 2 and 3, and then again, one of those numbers is going to have to be negative to get that. Okay. So now we're just kind of randomly picking which set that we want to use. So if we start with 1x and 4x, okay, so let's see, I'm going to write it below it here, and I'll put my final answer in that blue spot. So I said we're going to try 1x and 4x. Again, we need a positive and a negative in here. And then we can choose, let's just start with the first set, so 1 and 6. And see if that's going to work. So again, we're taking the outside numbers together. So we're taking 1 times negative 6. So that would be negative 6x, and then the middle ones times each other. So that would be 4x. So if I add those, we're going to end up with negative 2x. Okay, so that's not our middle term, so that means that I picked the wrong factors. And even if I switch signs, that would give us a positive 2x, which still isn't the correct answer. So now I have to try again with a different set of factors. So let's say that I switched to 2 and 3, and I'm going to keep my first set the same. So again, we multiply the last. So 1x times negative 3 is going to be a negative 3x. And then 2 times 4x will be 8x. And again, we're going to add those together. So negative 3x plus 8x will be a positive 5x, which is our middle term. So that means that we picked the right set of factors. So I'm going to write that down here. So we would have x plus 2 and then 4x minus 3 as that final answer if we were using the guess and check method. All right, for the rest of these problems, I am just going to continue with grouping. So for the next problem, again, we want to check to see if we can divide the same thing out of all of those terms, and we can't. So that tells us that we take the first term times the last term. So 2 times negative 5 would give us negative 10. And then we need factors of negative 10 that are going to add to be negative 9. And this really has an x squared with it since our x had a squared with it. So I'm going to choose negative 10x and positive 1x. And that will add to be negative 9x. So now I'm going to replace this with my new set of factors. So we'll have 2x squared minus 10x plus x minus 5. And then again, we're going to group the first two terms and the last two terms. So from our first two, we can factor out a 2x, and then we would have x minus 5 left. From our second group, our common factor is 1, so I'm going to have a plus 1 in front, and then x minus 5. And then we're going to factor out x minus 5 next, and we are left with this 2x and 1, so that goes in my second set of parentheses. So this would be my final answer for that problem. All right, next example. So again, we can't factor anything out of the 3 terms, so I'm going to multiply first and last. So 4x squared times 9 is going to give us 36x squared. So factors of 36, I'm going to choose, since we're trying to add to be 12, 6x and 6x. So I'm going to replace my 12x with my new factors. So 4x squared plus 6x plus 6x plus 9. And again, we're going to group the first two and the last two and then do GCF. So from the first two, we can factor out a 2x, and we would have 2x plus 3 left. The second set, we can factor out a positive 3, so that will leave us with 2x plus 3. And then I have 2x plus 3 as my parentheses, so I'm going to factor that out next. And then in front, so the 2x and the positive 3 are going to be left. So since I have the exact same set twice, I'm going to write it as 2x plus 3 squared. So this would be my final answer for that problem. So looking at the last term, or the last problem for this section, I can factor out a 2 to start with. So if I factor out a 2 from everything, I would have x squared minus 6x plus 8. So that means that I can do my normal factoring, since this is now a 1, where we're trying to find two numbers that multiply to be the last term, add to be the middle. So the 2 is just going to come down. We're going to have an x and an x. And since we're trying to multiply to be a positive, add to be a negative, both of my signs will have to be negative. And then we would have to choose 4 and 2. And then this would be the final answer.